I'm happy to introduce our panelists. I will introduce them in the order that they will speak in, then I will disappear, and then they'll take it and they'll speak each for 8 or 10 minutes or so before we'll have some conversation among them and with you. So our first speaker will be Shannon Evans. Shannon K. Evans is the author of the books Feminist Prayers for My Daughter, Rewilding Motherhood, and Embracing Weakness, as well as the guided journal Luminous, I guess. She is the spirituality and culture editor for the National Catholic Reporter. She also writes and leads retreats for us at the Jesuit Conference. So Shannon, you're very welcome. Charisse Broderick King began working at Regis Jesuit High School near Denver, Colorado in 2008 and established the school's communications office in 2011. Leveraging her educational background in journalism and psychology, her certification in the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and lessons learned in the Jesuit Schools Network seminars in Ignatian leadership, she focuses on creating clear and impactful communications firmly rooted in Ignatian ideals. Welcome, Charisse. And Father Michael Rossmann, S.J., is a Jesuit priest and a doctoral student at the Gregorian University in Rome. He started the 1 Minute Homily and previously served as the editor-in-chief of the Jesuit Post. He is the author of the book, The Freedom of Missing Out, and he posts a weekly video reflection at amdg.substack.com. Father Michael, welcome. All right, so we have a nice full hour for you, so I'm going to get out of the way, and we'll turn it over to Shannon as our first presenter today. Take it away.
Okay, hey everybody. It's always weird to not see your faces, but I'm believing in faith that you are actually there and not robots. So they did a really cool job of pulling together 3 people who have really different spheres. And so for myself, I just speak as someone who is a spiritual nonfiction writer, book author, and editor of spirituality and culture for National Catholic Reporter. So my job is not to educate. It's not about theology necessarily. I see my job as one that is exploring and that encourages other people to explore and encourages the reader's curiosity. So I get the privilege of writing about sort of whatever is interesting to me at the time, which I really recommend that path. It's a really fun way to have a career. But yeah, as far as finding your message, kind of just being aware in a really Ignatian sense, noticing what is capturing your imagination, whether that's, spiritual things, if you're a spiritual writer, or, other ideas, if you are a writer or a content creator in other avenues. But for me, it's more about finding what's already there, what's already kind of working inside of me than like starting from scratch. I mean, I have several of those books that are like 1001 writing prompts, and I never open those books because for me, what I want to write about is what's already bubbling up. It also has the benefit of keeping my spiritual life fresh. I think that if I wasn't a writer, I wouldn't do as much praying as I do, because I think having to create new content, it's like, okay, like what's going on in here? What's bubbling up? What's stirring in my spirit? And it helps me pay more attention to it. As an editor, what I look for as far as messaging goes is writers who have something to say. They don't even necessarily have to be technically the best writers, though that helps. I don't ever turn that down. But who has something to say, who's not just repeating things that have already been said, or kind of reading from a script almost, but who has a lived experience to share, who has a unique perspective that they're bringing to the table. And so that's my priority as an editor. I think my personal theory is that the sweet spot for finding your message is to find that intersection between the things that interest you and excite you to learn more about and to explore, and the things that tend to resonate with your readers, and so, or your audience. And so if there's an intersection between those two, that's the sweet spot. If you don't have an audience yet, we're going to talk about that more in session 2. But I think that is a really exciting invitation to follow those inner movements and to use Ignatian language to let the Spirit lead you and to see, to get to try a lot of new things before you kind of hone in on one message, but get to kind of explore where the Spirit is leading you. Today, more than ever, I think it's fair to say there's so much competition for our attention. For one thing, our attention spans, I mean, it's well documented, right? They are just tanking by the day. Our attention spans are going down. And at the same time, there's so much competition for our attention with social media, with like, make this video in 30 seconds or less. You know, we might read a couple of paragraphs before we switch to the next article that we're reading. So there's a lot of noise. And so my advice would be to always go for quality over quantity. Don't put things out in the world just to get things out, just to turn it out quick. Really do it well, make it worth our while. Like, please, as a reader, as a consumer, like, make your work worth our while, because we need more worthwhile stuff in the world. We don't need more like hastily done crap. So make it good, go slow, be thoughtful. As an editor, I get pieces that I'm like, clearly this is a first draft. Like, you sent me your first draft. Why? And like, why do that? Why not sit on it another week and revisit it, you know, in 3 days and 6 days and make it better, make it the best it can be before you submit it. I think, especially at the beginning of your career, it's really easy to get consumed by this idea of like, I need to get my name out there. I need to produce, I need to, just make a name for myself. But you want to do that in a really conscious way. And you want to do that in a way that actually is going to assign value to your name and assign a sense of trust that your readers or your audience can trust that the things that you put out are going to be high quality. I have failed at this plenty of times in the past, but that's something that I'm learning the longer I'm in this game. So don't settle for your first draft. Let it simmer. I think as a mom, I have 5 kids. As a mom, I think this is one of the gifts that I kind of begrudgingly accept about being a writer and a parent, is that you're often slowed down out of necessity. And that can be really frustrating, but it can also be a blessing because it makes you have to chew on things longer. You can't just churn out something in an hour because you're distracted and you have to cook or, you know, whatever. But like, as a parent, your attention is so divided. And so it might take you twice as long to accomplish something as it does someone else. But that's not always a bad thing. That can often be a perk. So if you're a parent watching, I'm high-fiving you from afar. But honestly, when we talk about the message that your audience wants, in the midst of all of this noise that we have around us, people are really hungry for authenticity. And that doesn't always mean like just airing your dirty laundry, but it means having something to bring to the table that is of value, that has some meat on it, that's not just fluff. I think, you know, kind of going back to that, you know, you have 3 minutes to tell somebody something. Like, what is it that you really want to say? Don't waste your time with shallow nonsense, essentially. To be an effective creator of any kind of content, my best advice is go to therapy, go to spiritual direction, go through the Ignatian spiritual exercises, like do your inner work, because that's going to make the work that you produce so much richer, so much more valuable for your reader or your audience. And just can't be overstated. Just keep exploring those inner movements and what's coming up inside of you as you live your everyday life, and kind of explore where that can go creatively. So I'm going to leave you guys with a list of resources that I think they're all books that I like. So grab a pen and paper super quick to just jot down some of these titles, because they are my go-to recommendations for, I guess, essentially most of them are about writing specifically. The one that's not is Big Magic by Liz Gilbert. That one is just speaking to any creative, and that might be my favorite on the list. It is so good and so easy to read and engaging, and she's just a great writer. So Big Magic by Liz Gilbert. My favorite book on the craft of writing is Stephen King's memoir, which is called On Writing. Love that one. Anne Lamott has a good one called Bird by Bird. And she's hilarious if you've ever read any of her stuff. So that's really fun and easy to read too. Madeline Lee Ingles' Walking on Water is about the creative life. I would say it is about writing, but in general, I think any creative person would probably resonate with it. But what's unique about that one is that it weaves spirituality into it. And so it's a really good one for a person of faith who is also a creative. And then for my authors or hopeful authors specifically out there, Courtney Maum, M-A-U-M is the last name. I've never heard it pronounced out loud, so apologies to Courtney if I said that wrong. Her book Before and After the Book Deal is just so valuable if you're hoping to get published, kind of wherever you are in your professional career. That's just a really good one if you hope to write books or in the process of writing a book, or even have signed a book deal and you're looking at the daunting task of marketing it. That's a really good one. But generally, I also just want to say, like, read things that make you brave in your creative life, and read things and consume things. I mean, films, TV shows, stories, anything, but like feed yourself creatively with things that give you the courage to take risks. And to Maggie Smith, the poet, she says that writing is like permission slips. So, you know, a writer or a creator will do something and it gives you a permission slip to go one step further, or to do something creatively that you never thought you could do, or to say something that's true that you didn't think you were allowed to say. So read things that exercise that muscle inside of you. For me, I really love reading modern female poets. I kind of find that feeds that in me. Of they make me braver and more hopeful in a lot of ways too, that I can be braver and that people want that. So that's my list: On Writing, Big Magic, Bird by Bird, Walking on Water, Before and After the Book Deal, and then whatever else makes you ready to take risks and gives you permission. So that is my spiel. I'm going to turn it over to Charisse Broderick King, who has a whole another like realm of expertise to share. So I'm excited to introduce her. Here's Charisse.
Thank you, Shannon. And I'm anxiously awaiting Shannon's upcoming book on Feminist Prayers for my daughter. That is going to be great, I'm sure, for me, but I also happen to have 2 adult daughters, so I'm looking forward to that. And I, working in a high school for the past 15 years, wanted to kind of take a different tack on this. So I'm going to approach this more through the lens of content created on behalf of an institution, a Jesuit institution, rather than personally, although I have written and been published personally. But I think what I will share here should be applicable to anyone writing, because it's about message and how you craft your message. And I will say likely most of this is not particularly new, but I hope to offer a kind of a different take on it, so that you have another perspective. Maybe sometimes seeing things in a new way brings up revelations, at least for myself. And Shannon provided a perfect segue, because as I was putting this together and reflecting, I saw Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird fingerprints all over kind of how I had put this together. So I'm going to share a little graphic for you that I put together things that I consider as I am writing on behalf of Regis Jesuit High School, and that I think are applicable to people who are writing for institutions generally, but especially for a Jesuit institution. And so I wanted to point out, I'm presenting this as a 1D image, but basically my idea is kind of like it's this open face sandwich where mission undergirds every communication, and that's from the appeal for support and rationale for tuition to the announcement that the tickets for the spring play are on sale, or the snow day, or the emergency message. And so, that the mission is the foundation of everything that we are doing, and provides that throughout. That's the through line through all of our communications pieces. And then kind of the condiments on the top are the voice. So that's the guide that serves to show how the message sounds regardless of authorship. So in an institutional setting, oh, I'm sorry, let me show, I didn't complete the clicking of the graphic. Thank you, Mary B. So we should, the voice is the overarching piece of how we talk consistently from one voice, how we're all singing from the same songbook, so that it sounds authentic. Our messages, regardless of authorship, if it's me authoring it, if it's other people authoring it that I am maybe editing, that it still sounds like the institution. And what helps kind of tie those pieces together are that center circle in the green, which I call the communication circle of C's. So as I approach, pretty much any communication, and whether this is, something, I think I do this kind of innately now, but definitely as I was approaching it initially, my first 3 overriding questions are, what's the purpose of the communication? What do I want the audience to know? What do I want them to do? Is there a specific call to action? Or is it just, what is the end result I'm looking for? And then I think most importantly, especially considering how important relationship is in Jesuit work, is how do I want them to feel? Both in the message of the communication, but what is kind of that relationship continuity underneath, undergirding this message. So these C's are just ways to help ensure that those things are happening. So the clarity of the message, have I answered those questions? And have I answered the questions of the audience, the intended audience, before they've had a chance to ask them? That was one of kind of the failures in some of my early efforts, is not providing enough clarity about what the end result was. And so then you spend a lot of time sending out clarifying information instead of saying, have we answered all those questions? Then again, consistency, but I would say this is consistency, but not cloning. So, in an institution, I'm kind of called to ghostwrite a lot of messages for people, where I'm not the signee. I'm writing for the president or the principal or one of the assistant principals. And so we want that consistency of voice across all the platforms and all the constituencies that we're reaching out to. But these are like the words and the phrases that we interweave into all of our messaging, so that we know, the reader knows it's us. It's still us. It's that voice of authenticity that Shannon talked about, that it's authentically coming from us, but at the same time, not losing the voice of the individuals. So that it seems like ChatGPT wrote the message from both the principal and the president. They're 2 different people. We want to honor their individual voices in that, but still have that consistency of voice and message. And then caring for your audience. really knowing who they are. And at a school, there's lots of different audiences. So, what alumni care about more particularly versus what students or parents care for can be slightly different. So really understanding who they are, that's so important. That's key. The Jesuit idea of cura personalis is in our messaging as well. I take into account from, knowing Myers-Briggs, how that message is presented so that people who prefer sensing in their gathering of information are accommodated just as well as people who prefer intuition. And then I'm kind of, fact checking and doing those pieces, consistency of pattern and those types of things that are ensuring that the message will be well received. And then also caring for what intergenerational and intercultural considerations are at play. Again, at a school with alumni that, go back to, living alumni in their 40s that we are communicating with all the way through, our prospective students. How are we utilizing the platforms that they are most comfortable with, the presentation of the material and modeling that differently for them, to make sure that they get what they need out of the communication. Connection is the connection back to the mission. So again, making sure that that voice is consistent, and how do you find it? How do you structure mission both explicitly and implicitly? So one of the examples I would share here is, if you ever look at our website, and I would encourage you to do so, is we have placed the student experience on the main navigation menu at the very center. And that is a very implicit way that we have said the student is at the heart of what we are doing. And everything around that is in support of the student, the community, our admissions process, our mission, our support processes, all are there to support our students. And so that was a subtle way to imbue mission into how we structured our website when we did our redesign a few years ago. And also, what can you take inspiration from? Shannon mentioned, reading lots of art. We go out to a lot of other Jesuit institutions, and my communications cohort members, I'm hoping a few of them are on here. We know we will say, I'm going to steal that idea from you. There are great ideas all around in the Jesuit network for how there's a different way to share mission. And we all think, don't have a handle on how that mission, we don't have, we're not the exclusive owners. It's this large network. And so definitely learning from others, seeing what they do well, and taking those ideas back into your own work. And it's a great joy to share that. And it's also a great joy to have that reliance and be able to collaborate with so many others on how we can make our communications better. And so that would be the last, one of the last things is the collaboration. So, I collaborate with internal colleagues very frequently, obviously, but also my network colleagues. The communications crowd, especially among the Jesuit secondary schools, we are a tight-knit group, and we utilize each other, rely on each other, help each other out. And then other just trusted community members to give that fresh perspective. I have parents that I work with who work in communications who will tell me, like, this is not resonating, this is not speaking, this doesn't sound like you. When we're launching new ventures, just gut check, make sure it's not too much inside baseball, because we all know that Jesuits have a language of their own, and we need to constantly be educating around that and what that really means, that they're not just buzzwords and Latin phrases that we toss around lightly, that what really is the meaning. And then finally, channel. Both, this is kind of both a combination of the platform. So social media, sent via email, video, and the multimedia facets. So how do we combine those things, and how do we utilize those pieces well together? Again, taking into account generational pieces, cultural pieces, how are we using the channels and the tools we have at hand to best communicate with the various constituencies that we are here to serve. And so those are all kinds of things that I take in there. It's probably more of a Venn diagram than it is nice, neat little pie pieces. But I know this is kind of the way that I put things together, that I consider somewhere, either if I have to go look explicitly at this, or I just know, there's certain things. These are the things that I am accounting for. My piece of advice that I would give to any writer, and this is kind of directly from Anne Lamott, is get something down on paper. And don't fear the garbage draft. For a lot of time, I used to think that I had to be fully ready to write something, and it had to be fully formed in my mind before I could put it on paper, or in an email. But now I go ahead and just start writing. And that is not the thing that I would submit, but that's the starting place, and just starting on that. And then using those tools that we all have access to for the mechanics and spelling and readability and all of that. Those are pieces that I would highly recommend anyone utilize. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Father Michael Rossmann, who is joining us from Rome. And so he is going to be the next speaker. Thank you very much for your time today.
Great, thanks, Reese, and good to be with all of you. I do have some experience just kind of staring into a camera and talking, so I don't feel too awkward right now. I want to begin with, in Jesuit language, a composition of place, naming a few aspects of our contemporary reality. First, it's noticeable that people are not going to church as often as they used to go. And people especially are not affiliating with a particular religion in ways that maybe they did just a couple of decades ago. Secondly, as Shannon mentioned, we have declining attention spans. Recently, I was reading an article that referenced, quote, digital dementia and TikTok brain. I think many of us have the experience, even if we don't use TikTok, of reading something and then getting distracted by something else and forgetting where it is we were. I am horrified at the statistics regarding the decline in book reading, for example. There are many signs of a declining attention span. But then at the same time, I also cannot help but notice kind of the rise of podcasts, including 3-hour podcasts, sometimes on topics of tremendous depth. Additionally, maybe it's not so deep, but I also see how, people have followed Game of Thrones for 7 seasons, that yes, people are, addicted to TikTok, so on and so forth, very short content, but there also seem to be signs where people are willing and able and interested in following something for quite a long period of time. I've heard reference to, quote, the hollowing out of the middle in terms of our media consumption. It seems as if either really short or really in-depth seems to be what is resonating with people today. Perhaps on some level, we might see a hollowing out of the middle of Christianity, at least to a certain extent. Perhaps there are fewer lukewarm Christians than there used to be. In this composition of place, I can't help but notice the eternal God-shaped hole in all of us. Our hearts are restless until they rest in God. But I also notice a pretty strong distrust of institutions. I think for those of us who are trying to kind of tell our story and tell the Christian story in our contemporary reality, we oftentimes have to provide some on-ramps for religion, connecting with people's search for meaning, their desire for adventure and beauty, their longing for some practical wisdom, how to live a good life. We need to show that people are not alone and that we understand them in some way. And as Sharice mentioned, we now live in the time of ChatGPT and large language models, the age of artificial intelligence. I think especially when we think about telling our story moving forward, the vanilla version just isn't going to resonate with people. But there is an opportunity for communication that is personal and playful and unpredictable and soulful. We can tell stories and craft new phrases and connect on that human level. Of course, I'm a Jesuit priest and I regularly preach in person and celebrate the sacraments, but a fair bit of the communications I do more publicly could probably be called pre-evangelization. I don't hide the fact that I am a Catholic priest, and I try to regularly integrate the Christian tradition in the video work and writing that I do. But in addition to trying to speak to people who are already converted, I definitely do hope, at least in some way, to share a message that might resonate with people who aren't 100% on board. And on a personal level, in trying to do this, I notice when I look back on kind of work I've done over a number of years now, I see as in my own work, kind of much of what I try to communicate falling into a few different buckets. Try to connect on the themes of living an abundant life. I talk a lot about discernment and decision-making. And then I also talk a fair bit about kind of the creative process and productivity. And I mentioned these three buckets because these are kind of the intersection of my interests, what I might have to offer, and what, some people at least might be interested in. This, in some ways, relates to a series of questions that Father Michael Himes, some of you may know of him, he was a professor at Boston College for many years. He offered these three questions in helping people kind of with vocational discernment. He asks, do you get a kick out of it? Are you any good at it? And does anyone want you to do it? Do you get a kick out of it? Are you any good at it? And does anyone want you to do it? How we answer those questions, of course, is going to look different for different people. But I think trying to pay attention to, okay, what, we have to bring, what really makes us come alive, and also what we have to share that resonates with people. That's oftentimes a good place where we might try to kind of share a personal story and share the larger story. In my own work, when I look at resources that are really helpful, I notice that I need to be nourished in a few different ways. First, I need to be grounded in scripture and Christian tradition and the liturgy. I also need to be nourished by depth. I don't only want a TikTok diet. I love books, and I know that, there's just a great return on investment I get from, really sitting down with something for a significant period of time. But at the same time, I do, as someone who wants to communicate in this time and place, I do need to be aware of, trends and kind of the larger media landscape and how that landscape is changing. I try to pay attention to what out there might be both deep and popular. Obviously, lots of things go viral that are not very substantive, but when something seems to resonate with people, and many people, but there is a message of depth there, I try to pay attention and see what I might learn. In my own media diet, I look for diversity of voices and types of media. So lots of great people are doing religious work, and that nourishes me on a personal level. I am also very interested in learning from non-religious voices as well. people from the right and the left and the center and the heterodox, mainstream outlets. I probably subscribe to 25 different Substacks, just getting a diversity of interesting voices. Shannon made some book recommendations. I could do the same, and I could also put these in the chat. But a couple non-religious voices that have been really helpful for me, just kind of in the creative process and in the communications world, would be the work of Seth Godin, who's kind of an expert in marketing. And immediately when I say that word marketing, maybe, you know, people's neck hairs go up. But I think all of us, at least depending on how we define that word, are involved in marketing and in sharing a story and conveying a message that we want to resonate with people. Godin's book, This is Marketing, I think is his best distillation of kind of some of those lessons that those of us who are kind of trying to communicate a Christian story that we could learn from as well. And then a second resource I'll mention is a book called Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. And this is kind of a system for kind of gathering quotations and different resources as one consumes different media, making connections between what is consuming, then in the process of trying to craft one's own narrative as well. Forte's insights have been helpful, and they've resonated with kind of a personal process of my own that I've been practicing for a number of years. And then one last resource, there's a great young guy, David Perel, and his long essay, The Ultimate Guide to Writing Online, I think is a really helpful resource for those of us trying to kind of speak in that online space, particularly through the medium of writing. I know our time is limited and we're going to have some conversation. What I would just say as kind of one last little story is that, you know, I've been making videos for quite a while now. I started the 1 minute homily in, gosh, almost 6 years ago. And when I look back at some of the early videos that I made, I cringe because they're really bad. And they took me so long. They took me so long. But a mantra of mine kind of through this whole process is that the only way is through. The only way is through. So I absolutely agree with Shannon's insight that, okay, we want to offer quality to the world. And as consumers, we want to consume quality materials. But the way we reach that quality may take, you know, quite a few iterations. It may take some repetition to get there. So I'll stop there and hopefully we can continue the conversation. And I'll call back my college roommate because he wasn't going to mention it.
That's right. Going way back. We'll ask all of our panelists back to the stage. And thank you all so much for your reflections and the real depth and breadth in just this short amount of time. And I want to get to some questions that folks have. Already some questions are coming in that are really good, either through the Q&A or in the chat. And Michael, since you brought up college, there's another one of our college classmates who has a good question from Joe. And Joe Nava wants to know what true success looks like for us. Beyond, like, what are we going toward here? Beyond views, shares, and follows. What is the true goal of being a content creator in faith-based spaces? Is there a measure of success that fits within our Ignatian lens? And maybe I'll ask Shannon to take that one first.
I mean, I think that, you know, for different purposes, the answer could vary, but I think it's always, you know, ultimately, does it bring God glory? And that can be fulfilled in a lot of different ways. I think, you know, if someone's life is touched, if someone is helped, if we understand the movements of the Spirit better inside of us and nobody ever cares about it, about what we produce, that's still bringing God glory. So I think that would be the ultimate success. Maybe it sounds cliche, but I think with a Christian lens, with our Christian perspective, that's really the only answer that can satisfy, because there's an element of the rest of it that we don't have control over. But if we can feel like we are authentically seeking to please God and to be united in God, then I think that we have succeeded.
Michael, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I think Shannon nailed it. When in doubt, in an Ignatian context, for the greater glory of God is always a good answer. Yeah, I think I would echo much of what you just shared, that, we're looking for, okay, the human person being fully alive, in the words of Ignatian, that, yeah, seeing signs of abundance, seeing signs of people coming alive through the work that we're doing. But yeah, glory of God and the service of God's people ultimately is what we are, what we're after.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of questions about competing values of depth and popularity. So Michael, you talked a little bit about that. I have a question about balancing that need to be hip to communicate to people who are maybe on the fringes, but then also to be serious enough in which the content requires. And then maybe even if there are any examples of recent stuff any of you have encountered that you found both deep and popular. So maybe Michael, you want to take a crack at that and then can ask any of the others.
Yeah, okay. I may not necessarily have an example that comes to mind just immediately in terms of a specific piece or something. And yes, I think we're after depth, especially the previous Superior General of the Jesuits, Father Nicolas. He always wanted to kind of, encourage all of us in the Ignatian family to be people of depth, that we are so often kind of just, satisfied with junk food equivalents, but what we want to be about is substance. That doesn't necessarily mean every single piece that we try to share, whether it's through writing or video or a podcast or something like that. It's not as if every single piece has to be, the work of the greatest depth. That depth sometimes can be achieved, over time, through kind of starting a relationship, as a communicator. And honestly, people may not necessarily be ready to dive into the deep end immediately. And so there is some navigation in terms of trying to communicate in a way and lower the bar to a certain extent, such that people might be willing to engage with us, and over time we can hopefully communicate that depth. Those are some thoughts.
Either of you, Charisse or Shannon, want to take that one too? No?
I think in what tends to be very popular and showcase depth and showcase it is whenever we tell stories and show mission on its feet. How our students are engaging with their curricular work, but especially with the kind of formational pieces that we offer them here, their retreat experiences, their immersion, service immersion experiences, and showing that where those things tend to be very popular when we share them, and also show the depth of the mission in an accessible way. And so that, whenever we can, we're trying to utilize those, that kind of telling of story, because it's the deeds or the action, not just the words, showing how our mission is alive.
We had a question, Charisse, for you specifically in that work as you're doing. How have you been able to get consensus from your leadership on what unified voice should be? And that's also a question for Shannon, I think, maybe after in a different context. But as you're looking to see that kind of what you want to offer in the section that you're working on at NCR and culture and spirituality, what are those? Yeah, you talked a little bit about that, but what are some of those things you're looking for in voice? So I'm curious, for maybe starting with Charisse in your context, and then Shannon on that one.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with I'm the author. So putting the voice, making that voice kind of having the consensus around it, is helpful if I'm the one who is at least, penning the initial draft, or on the other end, kind of editing that. But part of it, I also think, is I'm part of the leadership team. So I inform those conversations and I hear the things that we're talking about, and then can translate that into how are we sharing this information, and synthesize all of the input from the other members of the leadership team into that, make sure that that we have all the key points to start with, so that there isn't a sense of people feeling like we've missed the boat. So I think part of that, and that, that didn't come right away. That took a long time before. So it wasn't something that we just decided. I think there was just this recognition that we need to all be kind of marching along in the same way. And so, a starting point and an ending point of just knowing that one person is really kind of guiding that has helped with that unification of voice. But there has to be buy-in.
Yeah, from a context as an editor at NCR, I think I can relate to some of what Charisse was expressing of like, there are individual voices, but there's also a unified, more cohesive voice that the individual voices still have to fit into. And so I think it's been interesting actually for me to work on the editorial end of publishing, because as a writer, sometimes you can get offended or like miffed because, if you get rejected, you're like, well, why didn't they want my piece? And from an editorial lens, it's like, well, okay, maybe the voice wasn't right for that outlet, or maybe they had run something similar to it not too long ago. I mean, there's lots of reasons that don't mean you're bad at what you do, although it can feel really personal. But I think that makes a really strong case for doing your homework before you submit as a freelancer, to know what the voice is of each publication that you're interested in submitting to, because they're all going to be a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, I think that we certainly don't want to lose individuality and perspective. And I think for me, the way that I found my voice as a writer was by writing, and just writing. Back then it was like blogging, back in the day, but whatever it looks like, even just in a journal. But yeah, I mean, that's the balance that Father Rossmann said, like, it's the balance between the only way to get better is to go through and to keep doing. So quantity actually does matter, but you don't have to put all of it out into the world, right? You could just practice. Anyways, so yeah, finding your voice often takes time, often takes kind of just muddling through for a while until you land on it. But then finding the places that can host your voice well, whether that's an online newspaper, whether that's a print magazine, whether that's a publishing house for a book, kind of want to make sure you're not just shooting in the dark, but that it has some cohesion.
There's a question that came up about social media. And I think like anytime you're making something in writing, especially if you're not like giving a talk in a moment and seeing people reacting to you, you're kind of like imagining who your audience is and like crafting for that audience. And sometimes that you put it out there and you don't really hear back much. Maybe social media can sometimes be a way of engaging. I know Michael and Shannon, at least I've seen you kind of be able to have some conversations. What have you seen? Like, has the internet enabled any of that kind of sharing for you? How can you use that without like going down some of those social media rabbit holes that can be kind of dangerous? Time sucks. And we'll get, I think, on this topic in 10 days or so, like as you build our audience, but just for you, in terms of as a creator who's also on social media, how do you use those tools and keep them in like their proper place, I guess? Michael, maybe you could start with you.
Yes. So, I mean, the majority of my communication work would be kind of mediated through social media platforms. So it's absolutely kind of essential to what I try to do. And I mean, I don't need to go through the laundry list of, frustrating elements of social media. Of course, there are tremendous, gifts as well. Yeah, and at times it can be exhausting. Sometimes maybe in a particular way because I primarily communicate through video, which is obviously an audio-visual medium. And so especially if people follow me over time, even people I don't personally know may feel like they get to know me. What's the parasocial relationship? Is that the term? And that can be strange, especially when there's just different expectations there. I can't respond to everyone immediately, and yet, okay, I could focus on that, or it's much more pleasant to focus on just the tremendous gifts, and they are abundant. The opportunity to connect with real people, and there are so many people I regularly, talk with directly that I've never actually met in person, and those are real, relationships. So there are certainly landmines. I definitely have limits on kind of when I use social media and how long I spend, so on and so forth. I just kind of need to kind of artificially build in those constraints. But for the most part, I see quite a bit of beauty, which perhaps not everyone sees if you, scroll through Twitter or something.
I think I don't have a lot to add to that without like totally going into what the next session is going to cover. But yeah, I think it's possible. I feel like it's a constant discernment of time spent and whether it's life-giving or not. On social media, I've had to take breaks of, anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months. I have friends who have a schedule for themselves of what days they can be on social media, or they plan what they're going to post so that they're not just wasting a lot of time. So there's a lot of ways to go about it that doesn't have to feel like death. But yeah, I think we'll talk more about that in the next session.
Great. I think we have time maybe for just one last question. And Charisse, I'm wondering for you, someone had asked about writing for a broad audience, maybe faith content for an audience that might not be as familiar with specific traditions. And as someone at a Jesuit high school where there's a lot of Jesuit language, not to mention Catholic language, with families coming from all sorts of backgrounds, are there anything like lessons for you, or ways that you can maybe use some of that language and help build that kind of culture and tradition without seeming too jargony? There are things that have been helpful to you in that work.
I had to find the unmute button. I think a lot of it is a little bit is repetition of and not being fearful. We have, and we'll talk about this more, like we have an audience that cycles in and out, on 4 years. So we never can rely on the fact that people are going to understand everything that we're talking about. And, even sometimes the families who have had multiple children come through still are struggling. And so I think, repetition has been key, and accessible language, but also, just that whole Jesuit idea of meeting people where they are, and providing opportunities. So, in addition to what we're doing with our students, we have opportunities for parents to come learn more about our way of proceeding. But we're not fearful of the language. We call it our way of proceeding and then contextualize it so that it's understood that this is a Jesuit term and this is the way we apply it, or cura personalis. This, what do we mean by that? And kind of spelling it out in different ways and utilizing it frequently, so that it doesn't feel jargony. It feels authentic in our presentation, and it does take some sometime, and it's hard. That this is where having that kind of outside person who doesn't really fully speak the language, kind of fact check, gut check what we're putting out there, has been helpful, because it can become very inside baseball quickly. And when that's all you're writing. And, my husband is a spiritual director in the Ignatian tradition. So, like, I get it from all sides, and it's hard. So I can't necessarily work with him, but it's other people. Is this accessible language, and really finding those people who can help you. And then as listening, some of it, a key measure of success is, for me, sometimes is not hearing anything. That means it was, and the thing got done. You're like, what do I want them to do? How do I want them to, if they did it, and we didn't hear, that was complicated, that was confusing, then that, I think we're doing our job and they understand. It's probably a little bit of a recipe, and initially was very intentional following the recipe, and now is a little more innate, but that, like Michael mentioned, is like comes with the practice. Like the first few times we do something, we vet it. If it's a new project, it's a new program, we're going to be vetting that far more significantly than things that we've done year in and year out.
Charisse, thank you so much for that answer. Michael and Shannon, for all your reflection. And to our participants, thank you again for your great questions and for being here. We will be back in the same link, the same space, Tuesday, February 28th, also 12:30 to 1:30 Eastern time. We'll send a reminder email. We'll also email you with a lot of the links and resources that were mentioned. So you'll have that all written down in an email that you can refer to, because there was a lot of great stuff. I want to make sure we don't miss anything, but we do have that. So thank you again, and blessings on your weekend and next beginning of your Lenten journey. And we'll be back in the throes of Lent in 10 days or so. So thank you all again, and see you next time.